Good morning, everyone. My name is Bob Marashi from Accent Building Sciences, presenting the building envelope assessment. Basically, what we want to present to you is who we are first. We're an engineering company. We're specialized in building science. We've been in business for over 20 years. We are specialized mainly in waterproofing, roofing, building envelope rehabilitation. We also do forensic investigations and testing on building envelope elements. The other part of our business is building condition assessments, reserve funds, and performance audits and things like that. I myself I've been in business doing building assessments and building condition surveys and writing specs and looking at problems in buildings for a little over 25 years. I started with roofing back in early 90s, got into walls, windows, underground garage, waterproofing, some structural repairs here and there, and here I am. Building envelope basically is physically separating the interior condition of space from your exterior environment. It's a separator. It's basically keeping the outside out and the inside protected. That is your building enclosure. Some of the main components of building envelope components are roofs, exterior walls, windows and doors, which are called fenestrations, and very important part, joints and sealants. Everybody knows that. In this presentation, I'll try to show some case studies with failures in these items and these elements and these systems, and then go on to showing some problems that can be detected before major failures occur. And we go through some case studies for roofs, some case studies for wall failures, and followed by some problems that can be detected. We also look at some indicators and issues. But remember, a good envelope will protect your building for a long period of time, but a good envelope is a well-built and well-maintained envelope. You can't just build it and just don't look at it for years to come. You have to maintain it, you have to fix it as it ages. We start by basically roughly defining what buildings are. Buildings are dynamic. They're composed of simple and complicated systems. You get a simple building, you get very complex buildings. Buildings are built from construction material that they age like you and I do. They need to be replaced, they need to be repaired, they need attention. They also go through seasonal cycles. Some cycles and some years are moderate, some others are severe, depending on weather. Buildings are also used by occupants. Sometimes, unfortunately, they're abused by occupants. Depending on occupant usage and geographic location, exposure to an environmental element, all of that plays a factor on how your building is behaving and how it performs. Not all buildings are built the same. Quality of original construction, which is workmanship and material, is extremely important in how your building is going to perform in its life. Buildings require attention and repair. Don't forget that. A word of advice is don't delay any repairs or life cycle replacement of building envelope systems. Keep the maintenance costs separate from your capital expenditure. Don't think that because you repaired a few things in your building, now you don't have to carry out that expensive capital expenditure in 2 years. You still need to do that. Keep them separate. A combination of a strategically planned maintenance and a scheduled capital replacement is very important as your building goes through its life and ages and goes through life cycle. We think if you ignore these issues, will cost you money in variety of degrees, primarily escalated costs associated with major restoration and capital projects. It increases your cost when you do your capital if you don't maintain. That little bit of caulking that you could have replaced for $5,000 and you haven't done for past 10 years can cost you structural repairs, which we're going to look at some of these examples later on, for thousands of dollars. Secondary factors are interior damages that result from loss of productivity in the building and unexpected expenditures to anything inside the building, whether it be from your time lost or your employees not being at work, or tenants in the building, or flooring or anything else that gets damaged, or ceiling or interior finishes. Then now you have to fix. So let's review some case studies and issues to follow. We start with roofs, we go to walls and fenestration and some joints. Roofs are typically two types, low slope and steep slope, everybody knows. You can have examples of flat, built up, inverted roofs, metal roofs, shingle roofs, just some examples. This is a case study where we were involved. We were called upon in 2004 to go look at the roof. If you look at the picture on the top right-hand side, there was wind uplift damage on the roof in 2004, holes everywhere, patches. We recommended that this roof be replaced at the time. They actually used cinder blocks to hold the roof down for wind. Nobody did anything to it. We were called back in 2012. Same cinder blocks were still there. Same holes were there. So we started to do further investigation to see how bad the damage is now after 8 years. We did some cut testing. We did infrared thermography on the surface of the roof. We also did infrared thermography inside the building for the underside of the deck. The decking that was at the building at the time was Suprex panels, which is aerated concrete deck. It's very light. When it gets wet, it's full of air bubbles, basically. When it gets wet, it loses its structural integrity, and it turns into really sand. There's no structural integrity when it's really, really wet and goes through a freeze and thaw cycle. This deck was determined to be wet at some key locations. A picture of that was captured with an infrared camera right there. That's a wet location right at the joist. Long story short, after going back and forth, we determined that not only the roof has to be replaced, but also the decking below it needs to be replaced as well. So a roof replacement, which costs you $15, $20 a square foot, is now at $45, $50 a square foot because you have to really replace the deck. Building owner decided to proceed with the project in 2013. We prepared some specs and drawings and put a tender document together for the client, proceeded with the construction, replace the entire decking, which could have been avoided, from metal deck, from Suprex lightweighted concrete panels to metal deck, and give them a brand new roof. Another example of not taking care of your roof, or if it's built unfortunately wrong, is a roof that we just encountered not long ago. The roof is only 11 years old. The building was built in 2006. And we were called upon for one single roof leak at a drain in the hallway upstairs on the top floor. We opened the hatch and found that the leakage is from the drain pipe coming right from above the hatch opening. When we went up at the roof, we found the drain to be right there where that arrow is, and above the drain hole where the drain is. We did a cut test in that area. We found the insulation inside the roof to be wet. The system was a single-ply EPDM, loose laid ballasted, with polyisocyanurate insulation inside. The insulation was totally wet, and unfortunately there was no vapor barrier below the insulation, which is required by code and extremely recommended. We did further investigation by doing more cut tests and more probe tests. Probe tests allow you to penetrate a moisture probe into the membrane, into the roofing insulation layers, and measure if there is moisture in there. Unfortunately, a roof with ballasted system, you can't do an infrared scan or anything like that because of the amount of ballast on the roof blocks the thermal heat transfer from the insulation below to the surface. So you are on your own. You have to actually do physical destructive testing on the roof in order to determine what's wet and what's dry and how far that water damage got in. So after doing several tests around the area with one roof leak, which were on the right-hand side, on the east side of the building, everything came out to be wet, as the moisture probe indicates here. And when we did another one on the opposite side of the building, we found the opposite end of the building is also wet. We concluded that the entire roof is wet, and this roof could have lasted 20 to 25 years. Unfortunately, it had to be replaced after only 11 years or so, almost half of its life. It's in the hand of the condo board of the building to decide what they want to do with it. It has to be replaced because if you don't replace it, there's wetness, there's concrete, it's going to get damaged. There's no vapor barrier there. Original contractor who installed the roof did not put the vapor barrier on. And it doesn't help that not only you have a system that is not fully functional because it's lacking a vapor retarder, there was never a maintenance in the past 11 years. When you look at the seams of the membrane were open, there are openings around flashings, openings at perimeter. So you had two sources of water getting into the building from deficiencies on the surface and the lack of vapor retarder inside the roof. Just some examples to look for and the indicators on roofs. I'll go through a few slides. If you see a single ply membrane with open seams, such as that, or fasteners backing up underneath the membrane, that's an indicator that something's really wrong inside your roof. You got to do something about it. No sharp objects on the roof. No flashing open. If you have any flashings that are opening up, please fix them before it's too late. On built-up bituminous roofs with pea gravel, if you see pebbles of asphalt on the surface of the roof, that's what's called a tar boil. Asphalt is lighter than water and gravel, density-wise. As it ages, it comes out of the roofing system, it dries out. As it dries out, it comes to the surface as pebbles, and it starts to float when it rains, and it collects on low spots. So when you go on a roof on a dry day, you see all these little small asphalt pebbles sitting around the low spots and mainly around the roof drains. That's an indication of aging. If you see that, your roof is getting old. It needs to be replaced in the next number of years. You need to get somebody to look at it, do an investigation, do a study, see how many more years you have, and so you can plan it ahead of time. Blisters, ridges, ridges are unwanted. You don't want them on your roof. If you see them, please fix them before it's too late, because when it's too late, your gravel is going to move away from the ridge, exposing the membrane below, and the UV from the sun is going to degrade that membrane to a point where you're going to have a hole. Don't pop them, because when you pop them, you have a hole. It needs to be properly fixed. Here, I just put an example of a poorly fixed and repaired blister. Somebody put a modified cap sheet on it without removing the old stuff and left the corner open. Now you have felt membrane exposed, and you're still going to get a hole in a few years. So that was not a good patch. Blisters are also formed on two-ply mod bit roofs to a point where it opens up and you get the open seam. This needs to be repaired. Obviously, there's a hole on the roof right now on the cap sheet level. Any open seams on the joints have to be fixed. If you see surface of the modified bituminous roofing membrane that is alligatoring, it's an indication of drying of that membrane and deterioration. It's an aging indicator. Please prune trees. You don't want their damage flashing. A few other important things. especially on high-rise buildings. You get wind scoring effect on corners, on high wind locations around the corners of the building where it pulls the membrane and sometimes just stone and gravel away from the corner, exposing the membrane below and damage. Usually nobody uses pitch pans anymore on roofs nowadays, but you see them from time to time on some of the old roofs. But in any case, when you see a pitch pan, it should be curved upward, convex. It should not hold water like a bucket. It's a very simple thing. It causes a lot of headaches and a lot of leaks in buildings. I see it all the time. Simple repair, maintenance that needs to be done every year. Nobody does it. Not all leaks into your building are from roofs. Sometimes they're from mechanical units. Pay attention to your mechanical units. Otherwise, you got your roofer and your mechanical guy pointing finger at each other for a small little leak. If you have a flashing problem around anything on the roof, please fix it. Don't just throw Portland cement on it thinking that it's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. Portland cement is not a good friend with asphalt bituminous material. They're not compatible. They should be cleaned up. It should be fixed properly. Roofers often use Portland cement as a temporary measure during rain or snow on the roof just to fix it. But they need to go back and fix it properly with proper flashing. Drainage is a huge issue on roofs. Rule of thumb says two days of water ponding on the roof. After that, you need to do something about it. Well, that ponding on the image is more than 2 days. It's a swimming pool on the roof. And it's only there because the drains are plugged with tree debris and all the other garbage. And I try to put some examples of how you can plug your scuppers and your drains with garbage. Not only garbage is there, but also the membrane around that is all flashing, is wide open. Water is going to get in there. If you can imagine when it rains, all the water on that surface is going to end up at that drain. So you got all that beautiful roof, but poor flashing in the drain. The roof is vulnerable to leaks. Long period of water sitting on the roof will cause severe damage to the roof. And here's an example. Your installation is going to get collapsed. You got deterioration of the membrane and many other factors. Here's a good example of heat thermal loss through installation on an inverted roof on a building where installation boards, XPS they're called, are coming loose from the substrate, which is membrane below. As they come loose, the joints open up, heat transfer, and you can see it on a nice little snowy day. If you don't do anything about it, that insulation is going to peel right off the roof, come to the surface, and as it does, sometimes that insulation was spot mopped or glued down to the membrane. It rips the membrane apart. Cleaning of roof is very important. Unwanted vegetation is not wanted, really. If you don't have a green roof, you don't want a tree growing on it because the roots of that tree are going to go right into your membrane. Membrane below an inverted roof is an organic material, and vegetations love organic material. Drains need to be clean at all times. As an example, an inverted roof where drains are all covered. The only time you can see them is when there's a snow because the snow is melting around the drain. At that time, you have to spot the drains, go back, clean them up, and put a ballast guard. Otherwise, you're going to clog all your drains. Well, it is very important to perform annual inspection on a regular basis for roofs. It's usually recommended twice a year, before spring and before fall, before fall, sorry. And when you do that, please make sure that you get a report with it and a drawing that indicates what the problems are. Keep those information on record. Keep a good log over the years. As the building ages, I've seen that one engineer comes, another goes, another engineer comes, another goes, and nobody knows who and what they did before. As building owners and property managers and people who are on the other side, you guys, it's always a good idea to keep a record for anybody who comes to your building to see what has been done to the building. So getting a drawing and a report doesn't cost much, but it's good to keep. It's good to have. If you can't get up there, there are new technology. You can use drones to areas where you're not supposed to be walking because they're dangerous, and to do an inspection. That technology is here. Use it. It works. We use it. Finishing with some roofing, we go to walls. There are different types of walls. I'm sure you guys have heard. There are masonry, unit walls. There are exterior insulated finished walls, eaves, precast concrete, metal cladding, and some wood and curtain walls. I just want to show you 2 case studies that we've been involved, and move on to some problems with walls. The first one was a building in downtown Toronto. A panel of brick came off the building. We got up there. The only thing that was holding the panel was TV cables, basically, right on the sidewalk on Yonge Street. So obviously we blocked the sidewalk and closed the road. The next day we got up there and started investigating. We found severe cracking, severe deterioration, and a lot of problems with the building that weren't unknown, and nobody looked at them before. This image is on the 21st floor. Metal flashing was ready to just fly off. We took it down, obviously, but it was in very poor condition. The wall panels between brick to brick, we found some of them were moved by 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. That's wall movement. This usually indicates there's no shelf angle or shelf angle problem, or there's brick ties are damaged, or they're not there. There's some big problems. So we start investigating further. We found a lot of stress cracks on the building. On an apartment building, when you see a stress crack, it's really scary. That means brick is under pressure. So we start opening up shelf angles and panels of the wall that are bad. The client wanted us to fix the problem once and for all. So what we did is we start removing panels that were really, really bad on top, and we found out that the shelf angles were just too short. What happened was, I think they built the backup block wall too far away from the outward from the slab edge. They should have used a larger shelf angle. They didn't. They just used the shelf angle that came on site, which was a little too short. We started looking at different shelf angles on different elevations. At this time, building owner decided to replace the brick top to bottom, so we start removing bricks from top to bottom. Starting at the top, here's the 20th floor. That shelf angle goes from one end to the other, and I tried to put a series of pictures we took as we took the wall down to show how shelf angles were. So this is the first bolt on the one left-hand side, and this is the right-hand side anchor on the right-hand side of the picture. Everything was loose, 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 loose. The only anchor that was attached was in the one in the middle. Out of all those anchors, nothing was, when I say loose, it was loose to touch, and one of them was actually missing. And this was typical throughout the building. So this building actually went through entire wall replacement with new air vapor retarder on the back of wall, new shelf angles, waterproofing, new brick, and still there. The next case study for walls I want to show you is, again, a wall that could have been repaired 10 years before we arrived, but they didn't do anything until it was too late. We saw a lot of cracks, which are typical with problems with walls. What we do first, we like to do is we like to cut test the wall to see how the system works and what's inside the wall assembly. So we cut open and we see what's inside. We saw some pattern, which is, unfortunately, you see a lot of times they use construction garbage and brick to fill up the back of walls. And when you see that, it's bad construction practice. You know there's a problem. So you start opening walls up, and you look at cracks, and you look at behaviors, With this particular building, there was a lot of spalling on the surface, a lot of cracks and corners. When you see a crack on a building corner like that, that's usually movement of wall panels. On the one edge, which was the shear walls by balconies, we saw so much deterioration that there was holes in the brick. I mean, you can't miss that. You walk by, you see it, but it's the fact is nobody did anything to it. It could have been repaired long before it got to this stage. Again, the building owner, after looking at the cost of repairing the building, decided to actually demolish the building. So what we were told is to fix what we can and close it up just for a year or two before they demolish the building. We went back and started removing brick. Obviously, we found a lot of damaged bricks and everything that the contractor had on site used in backup wall. We fixed some of that for them. They didn't have funds to put any, unfortunately, insulation or any air vapor barrier. They just want to cover the wall up, make it safe until they demolish the building. So we introduced some shelf angles. The panels, the backup block walls were not secure, so we put some stiffeners in there and put the wall back together as we went. And this building is, I think, is being demolished or will be demolished by next year. Some problems with walls to look for and indicators. I see this all the time. Roof flashing, slope the wrong way towards the outside. From those S-locks on the metal flashing and from the metal flashing itself, drips right on top of the wall, damages the wall all the time. It's a very common thing you see. When you replace your roof or you do anything, you can fix that easily by putting some slope to that metal inward to the roof instead of outward to the wall. It drips on the wall, it freezes on the wall, it would damage your brick. It causes freeze and thaw cycles to spoil your brick, and you get that at the end. Also, if you see any signs of efflorescence on your wall, that means there's water in there. It's getting in there, and it's drying out on your surface, depositing salt on the surface of the wall. It's an indicator. It's an indicator for you to actually do something about it, not to just go clean it and walk away from it. You actually do need to find the source of moisture entry and do something about it to save your building. Some typical examples of wall problems: efflorescence, big cracks. I mean, how bigger can it get before somebody does something to this? Smaller cracks need to be fixed before they're this big. Again, some more examples of efflorescence built up on walls. That's due to air leakage from interior unit coming out into the balcony walls. You never know what's loose up there. This one brick was perfectly fine until you actually touch it and it comes to your hand. So it is important to inspect your building on regular basis. Make sure you look at things, you check them. Mortar joints get damaged as buildings age. This was an example of putting a hard mortar joint in front of a corroded steel shelf angle instead of a soft joint. And as the shelf angle behind gets rusted, it expands and pushes the mortar joint out and just fails. Another example on block walls that problems went unnoticed for a long time until blocks are completely loose. Below it is building entrance. They had to shut down the building entrance, remove all of that, fix it. Here's another little video clip of a stone unit that we found on one building. I hope this works. This stone is heavy and it's completely loose. The only thing holding it is a caulking joint on top. Now somebody went there and actually caulked the mortar joint. So they knew that it's loose. They removed at the top they removed the mortar joint, and they applied caulking and put a little weeper in there. But they didn't do anything about the problem. So things like that are dangerous. They need to be looked at. Once you find the problem, you got to really do something about it. Don't let it go unnoticed. Don't let it go untreated. Eaves are another exterior finish insulated system, are another type of walls that are more and more in use. The old types of eave systems were face sealed. Nowadays they're drainable, so they're drainage systems. But either way, your top surface of the eaves, which is called lamina, has to be free of crack, free of delamination, free of problems. When you see bulging of it, there is a problem. Either water is getting in from the top, or there's a crack somewhere, or there's delamination due to other reasons. This needs repair, this needs attention. If you don't do anything about it, it's going to cause a lot of damage. Any opening in the lamina has to be fixed. Anything like that is a problem. Sometimes there's physical damage, especially when you have architectural molding at the ledges of windows, say, or sills or anything like that, or at the roof levels. People go to the balcony, they throw things out, you damage that, it has to get fixed. If you don't fix it, the environment is going to deteriorate that for you really, really quickly. Water's going to get in, freeze and thaw, and everything else that comes with it. It starts to peel and causes more damages. Holes are actually, open holes are not a good idea. They need to be properly flashed and properly sealed. The bottom right-hand side picture shows a typical problem which we would discuss on a masonry wall where the roof flashing is sloping the wrong way. In this instant, it actually has a little dip in it in the middle, collects water. I think that flashing was a good 12-inch wide on top. So there's a lot of water sitting there, and it drips right over the parapet on the wall, down the wall, and on the windowsill below, and making a hole on that windowsill. And the poor guy down here was getting leaks. So regular inspection and periodic maintenance is very important. It's important for you to make sure that everything in the building is intact. And there's no, if there's any problems that comes up, you can actually address them, fix them before it's too late. Again, get a report, get a drawing, make sure all the problems are documented at every stage of the time as the building goes through its age and life cycle replacement. If you don't do that, you're going to end up with major capital expenditures. Instead of, normal costs, it's going to cost you a lot more. Fenestrations, without going into too much details of types, you got windows, doors, and skylights, some glazed, some architectural, some structural components. With the skylights, it could be as simple as different types of windows to a regular skylight, to a structural skylight, to a solarium. There's a variety of different fenestrations, the variety of different, there's just way too many. But problems are common problems. When you look at windows, it's easy to detect problems. Sometimes it's hard. If it's hard, you can do infrared, you can do thermography to find out any air leakage, any infiltration, or you can do water tests. There are different methods of testing you can carry on to find problems with windows and glazing. Here's a little picture of too much humidity inside a unit causing frost along the size of the pane of glass. But that's not the only problem. The biggest problem was air leakage from outside coming into the two corners. And when you zoom in, you can see there's air coming out from outside, cold air from outside drying that frost. That's an indication of air leakage. The same unit had too much moisture inside their unit. That's the way they live. That they had to use paper towels on the ledge of their windows just to keep things dry. But also the air leakage doesn't help them either. Here's another example of doing a little thermography. Air leakage from sashes, these operable sliders were loose. When we took them apart, it's a simple felt weather stripping that needs to be tight and airtight. It wasn't. It's a simple fix. If you fix it, you save your wall, you save your windows, you save your drywall, flooring, and you have happy tenants, right? With fenestrations, you can go to Skylights, a structural, non-structural. There's many different types. Here's just some examples of different types that you can see out there. Sometimes it's very difficult to find leaks with skylights and also with curtain walls or any type of fenestration system. One method is, it's a tedious method, but one method is water testing. Just get a hose, put a proper pressure to it, and start water testing. It takes a long time. Sometimes you find the leak, sometimes you don't find the leak. But if you know what you're looking for, chances are you're going to find the leak. If you have any indication on your systems where components are rusting out, fading away, sealants are drying out, that's an indication of aging. You need to address it. You need to fix it before it's too late. Water leak inside is an indicator that, there is a problem and you need to look at it. Insulated glass units, IGUs, supposed to be sealed, airtight. If they're not, you're going to get in a situation where water gets inside the panes, start leakage. If the framing here are made of two glass panes, insulated unit come together with a pressure plate on top, secured with glazing tapes and sealants. When all of that gets dry and deteriorated, they need to be repaired and fixed. If you don't, water's going to get in. Once the water gets in, it starts to corrode up high. If you don't do anything about it, all that moisture is going to come down to the bottom frame right there. And this picture is a zoomed-in picture to this area where it shows how water has deteriorated and corroded the anchor that holds the skylight all together at the bottom, where that anchor has sheared off completely and sitting on the corner. So this skylight is loose where there are leakage at the bottom and has a structural problem now. There's a life cycle for the glazing on these skylights. They need to be replaced. If you don't replace them, this is what's going to end up. If you have any units that are bad and the seal is broken, they're leaking, it's as simple as replacing them. Don't let them be there. Replace them, fix them. Joints and sealants. There's many different types of sealants you can get. There's many different joints you can have on your buildings. The more we build buildings with glass, the more joints we are introducing to these buildings. And the more sealants you have to be replacing every other year. Generally speaking, sealants are good for 8 to 10 years, no more than that. So if you have a caulking or a sealant on your building that is over 10 years old, it needs to be replaced. You hope sometimes that there's proper flashing behind those joints and sealants in your wall systems and assemblies. But sometimes there isn't, and your only line of defense to weathering element is that sealant. So if you don't fix that, it's a big problem. Joints can be undersized or oversized. If you see sealant is bulging out of your joint, that means that joint's too small for that application, which is up there. If the joint is too wide for the sealant inside, that means the wall movement is too big for that joint, and there is no, it's pulling out the caulking, so it's over-designed. Deterioration of joints vary. You can have, I have some slides in the next one that shows alligatoring on the surface, separation of the joint from surrounding areas. the drawing of the sealant itself, just some pictures of how they look like. I'm sure everybody's seen them. You're going to have to change caulking and sealants on a regular basis. That's the fact of life. That's how they are. They all have a lifespan, and they need to be replaced before that lifespan is over, not after or not at. Your best bet is to fix them before they run out. When you apply a sealant, it has to actually stick to something. This shows a fresh sealant. It's fresh. I mean, it's still flexible. You can bend it, right? But it's not attached to anything. It has to be continuous with no holes in it, and it has to be attached to the surfaces that it's applied to, not like that. You don't want to caulk and seal, apply over top of the unit. So overrunning on top of the unit is not a proper practice. The sealant should be inside the joint, not outside. If you see surface deterioration of sealant in terms of vertical lines and pulling away, either it's a scenario where the joint is just too big for that caulking, or the wall is moving. If the wall is moving, sometimes it's not supposed to be moving. This is a case where the wall wasn't supposed to be moving and it moved. And maintenance people at the building walked by this many times. They actually complained to us that caulking is pulling away. I said, you know what, probably the wall is moving. So when we went and looked on the other end of the wall, there was 1 inch movement. And it's opened up. You can see holes on top and the bottom of this image, which is just pulling the sealant away. These are not normal. If you see them, you have to do further investigation to find the source. Sometimes it's not just a simple wrong size sealant application. Sometimes there is a bigger problem where the wall is moving or other issues. You got to go back to the slide we had, do a little cut test and see what kind of wall system you have. Are there brick ties? I mean, you can go and look at your wall and there's no brick ties. You can do something about it before it's too late. But if you leave it for too long, you're going to have to replace all that wall. In conclusion, look for obvious things. If it's not, if it doesn't look right, it probably isn't right. Obvious things are always the most obvious, most easy thing to find. Most people know what a bad caulking is, what a bad brick is, what a bad block is, and if they see metallic material corroding, they notice that. But the problem is that they don't do anything about it. It's easy to detect these things. Do something about it before it's too late and too costly for you. Your biggest challenge to identify these sources is to find the moisture and water entry into the envelope and where it's coming from. Sometimes that's the biggest problem and biggest challenge to do. But there are experts and there are methods for testing, and there are trained eyes that can find these things. Sometimes they're simple, everybody sees it. Sometimes they are not. You actually have to get on your knees, open the wall, do a little cut test, throw some water at it, wait for a little bit until you find the problem. But you can find the problem. Once you find the problem, fix it. Otherwise, it's going to damage other things. It's very important to ensure your building is water and moisture and airtight. Preventive maintenance, like we talked about, is a key. It's a very important issue. You have to fix things before they go bad. Unfortunately, some people wait until they're bad, and they still don't do anything about it. That's even worse. The specific maintenance program is required for every building, meaning that not two buildings are the same and not two maintenances should be used for different buildings. Maintenance measures differ based on a variety of factors, such as the environment that the building is in, envelope types that the building has, or material and occupant use. You have to apply different maintenance methods for different buildings, for different locations, for different usage. You can't just say, I'm going to do tuck pointing repair on this building and I'm going to do that for all my buildings. Well, if the other buildings are different types, you can't do that. If they're in different locations, they need different times, different life cycle to carry out these repairs. Like I said, maintenance programs should be specific to individual buildings, and you can't mix and match them. It's best to get somebody who is familiar with building construction and a consultant or an engineer that does this for a living to come and tell you, to provide you with a specific for your building, a maintenance program. And you adopt that, you carry it on regular basis for maintenance and regular basis for capital expenditure. And that will serve best for the building and will last a long time. And the building is going to serve for its occupants and usage. I was told to stop 15 minutes before for questioning, and I think I'm on time. So just to recap, to look for roofs, there's a list of things to look for. I don't want to read through it. For roofs, for walls, for exterior windows, for joints. This is just a summary of what we talked about. Look for indicators and don't ignore them. Again, this presentation is available if you'd like to receive it. Let me know. I can put it in PDF and share it with you guys. Make checklists for yourselves. This is just a simple checklist, but it doesn't apply to every building, right? Make checklists for yourself, for your building. Go through it from time to time. Make sure that building is healthy. And thank you.